Hirohito, God Emperor of Japan, announced his nation's surrender on the 15th of August 1945. The sudden Japanese capitulation had occurred following a long period of diplomatic and military argument and wrangling. Though Japan was on its knees economically, its cities bombed to ruins by the Americans, its merchant fleet largely sunk by American, British, and Dutch submarines, its people starving, and its islands subjected to 2 atomic bomb attacks, many in the Japanese military were determined to fight on. Japan still controlled huge swathes of territory in Asia, with millions of troops still under arms. At home, the Japanese military was preparing to resist the U.S. invasion of Kyushu Island. Millions of troops and civilians were under arms, and thousands of kamikazes stood ready to make the Americans pay a fearful cost in blood and treasure for every inch of sacred Japanese soil. But some members of the government realized that to fight on would mean the end of Japan and the Japanese people and its culture. Emperor Hirohito, though a supporter of the war, now realized too that Japan must cease fighting. Aside from the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Soviet Union had also entered the conflict against Japan, Stalin's armies invading Japanese-occupied Manchuria and Mongolia and later Korea. The fear was that if Soviet troops got onto the Japanese home islands while all Japanese military attention was faced to the US threat from the south, Stalin could end up master of huge swathes of Japan. The Americans had made clear the terms of Japan's surrender, which appeared more attractive than communist occupation of half of the country, though some Japanese officers staged a coup in Tokyo to try and prevent Hirohito's pre-recorded message to the population announcing the end of the war from being broadcast. On the 15th of August 1945, the word surrender not being used, ordinary Japanese heard for the first time the emperor's voice. The question was, would the Japanese armed forces obey and lay down their arms? In order to accomplish this outcome, imperial princes and official envoys were sent out to territories still under Japanese control to persuade generals and admirals to obey His Majesty's order. The military mostly complied, but some units did not. Many Japanese military personnel couldn't live with the shame of surrender and sought self-sacrifice as a way to redeem their honor. All across Asia, Japanese troops ritually disemboweled themselves with swords, shot themselves, or blew themselves up with grenades. Others decided to die, but to take some of the enemy with them, and contrary to what history tells us, Japanese attacks continued for several days after the 15th of August 1945. The Kamikaze campaign against US and British warships off Okinawa had caused enormous damage to Allied forces. Masterminding the attacks was Vice Admiral Ugaki. He had gathered together a huge force of kamikaze aircraft on Kyushu, ready to attack the US amphibious invasion force that was due to invade in November 1945. When Ugaki heard Hirohito's surrender announcement over the radio and the order for the military to lay down its arms, he wrote in his diary that day that he had not yet received an official ceasefire order from his own chain of command, emanating from the Imperial Naval Headquarters. He decided that he would lead a final attack on the Americans to show them the spirit of Bushido, the way of the warrior. Though his subordinates tried to dissuade him, Ugaki, who had sent so many thousands of his own men to their deaths as kamikazes, evidently wished to follow them to what was perceived at the time as an heroic death, and climbed into the rear of a Yokosuka D-4Y dive bomber, known as a Judy to the Allies, along with 2 crewmen. 20 other airmen crewed 10 more Judy dive bombers, all determined to assuage the shame of defeat by crashing their planes into the US fleet off Okinawa. It appears from US records that no successful kamikaze attacks were made on US vessels on the evening of the 15th of August. Several Japanese aircraft were shot down, however, by US anti-aircraft fire.
He's hit, but he's still heading for the target. Missed.
The next morning, a U.S. landing ship tank found the remains of a Japanese aircraft and 3 bodies on the beach of Iheyajima Island. One of the bodies was that of an older, short man, whose head was crushed in and his right arm was missing. He wore a dark green officer's uniform without rank insignia, and a short Japanese wakizashi sword was found alongside the body. Admiral Ugaki had removed his rank insignia before boarding the plane, and carried with him a wakizashi that Admiral Yamamoto had presented to him earlier in the war. U.S. sailors buried the 3 bodies in the sand, but I suspect that Ugaki's short sword was retained as a trophy. Emperor Hirohito posthumously made Ugaki a Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun, First Class. However, Ugaki's death did not stop attacks on the U.S. On the 17th of August, Imperial Japanese Navy fighters rose into the skies above Tokyo to engage U.S. B-32 Dominator aircraft that were flying photo reconnaissance missions over the devastated capital. The B-32 heavy bomber was a new type, and the 386th Bomb Squadron was monitoring Japanese forces following the surrender, and trying to find routes that U.S. ground forces could follow into the heavily damaged city to begin its occupation. This U.S. activity evidently infuriated some Japanese commanders, who either ordered or permitted fighters to take to the air to engage the B-32s. A 2-hour running battle developed in the skies above Tokyo, with some B-32s suffering minor damage. The following day, 18th of August, 2 B-32s returned to photograph targets in the city. A group of 14 Japanese A6M-0s and 3 Nakajima N1K2J Shidenkai fighters intercepted them. One of the B-32s was very heavily shot up, resulting in the fatal wounding of Sergeant Anthony Marchioni, a photographer's assistant, who would hold the sad distinction of being the last American to die in aerial combat in World War II. In order to prevent any more such incidents, the U.S. ordered the Japanese military to remove all propellers from Japanese fighter aircraft, starting on the 19th of August. This prevented any further kamikaze attacks or interceptions of U.S. aircraft. But the very last known kamikaze attack of World War II wasn't made on U.S. forces, but was instead made on the Soviets. The Soviet invasion of Manchuria and Mongolia had commenced on the 9th of August 1945. The same day, the Americans dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. The Red Army advanced against fanatical, though much reduced resistance, as the Japanese occupation army had been strip-mined of its best units to reinforce Japanese efforts in the Pacific earlier in the war. But like the Germans on the Eastern Front, fighting against the Soviets continued for some time after the official surrender. Japanese forces continued resistance in Mongolia, Manchuria, and Korea, fighting until the 20th of August 1945. The day before the very final surrender, World War II's last kamikaze mission is recorded as having occurred. 5 Japanese aircraft made an attack on T-34 tanks of the Soviet 46th Tank Brigade of the 6th Guards Tank Army near Tongliao, Mongolia, the kamikazes managing to knock out 1 tank and damage 1 other. The formal Japanese surrender took place aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on the 2nd of September 1945 in the presence of representatives of all the Allied nations which had fought against Japan. This was also the official end of World War II. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.